Hey everybody, CVH here, and today we're going to be continuing our discussion of the Heroes of Skyrim cards with the Willpower section. So let's get started with Elixir of Vitality. Starting off on a pretty mediocre card, to say the least. 1 cost, gain 2 health 3 times, not a great support. I don't expect us to see much play in Constructed or in Arena. Arena especially because you need the cards that actually develop your board, and what are you really taking this over, let's be honest. So kind of disappointing way to start today's review. I don't think this is better than Healing Potion at all for control decks. I think it's mostly just relevant as a stealth nerf to Shivering Apothecary, probably. So yeah, pretty unexciting card. Next card, a bit more exciting. A 1-cost 2/2 Imperial Vanilla, with no effect, Solitude, Stalwart. I think this card could potentially be pretty good in some sort of aggressive willpower deck, like the mono-yellow deck or almost mono-yellow we were playing. Maybe Token Crusader, maybe something like that. Very simple card, not hugely impactful later, obviously, but one of the more ideal ways to start your game between this, Scouting Patrol, and Marked Man. This could definitely get in there and start pushing for a good amount of damage early, and we do see some cards that can take advantage of this with other Imperials and stuff. So yeah, I think this card is definitely one of the go-to things to draft for turn 1 in Arena, and in Constructed requires a very specific low-curve deck using Willpower, but could in fact make an impact. So yeah, I'll give it like a solid 6 or 7. Don't think it's going to be a staple by any stretch, though. Next, Cleric of Kine. 2 cost 2/1 with Prophecy, so already has that going for it. With Summon, give a creature plus 2 health. Alright, so the Prophecy makes it fine. You definitely don't hate this card. The question is really what needs this card, and I'm not thinking too much does. There are just a lot of really good 2-drops out there, guys. A lot of good 2-drops on curve. And yeah, at worst, you can buff this card itself to make it 2-drop 2/3, and at best, you can help something else trade and stay alive by giving something else health as it attacks another creature. And the Prophecy could even be relevant to give a creature you have guard or something like that, but, just a free creature off of Prophecy is fine. I like the card. I'll give it like a solid 6 or 7. I just don't know if I want to play it in anything yet. It's sort of a weird card for that. I'll definitely play it a lot in Arena. I struggle to think of a deck that really wants this card now that doesn't want a different 2-drop more. So that's my debate with Cleric there. But Cleric is a good card, I think. Priest of the Eight. I've heard some differing opinions about this. I like it, though. Summon and draw a card if you have 2 other willpower creatures. So the third one of these we've seen, 1 for each attribute. 2 cost 2/1, not great. Someone in chat called it a worse Thieves Guild Recruit, and while that is true, it still draws you a card. Just because a card is worse than Thieves Guild Recruit doesn't mean it's bad. And yellow does lack some card draw. It only really has Eastmarch Crusader. So for a deck like a heavy willpower deck or just token spell sword or something like that, which is where I first tested it, pretty good. I mean, you're going to be filling the board, so 2 cost 2/1 that draws you a card. While worse than Thieves Guild, potentially, it's still pretty reasonable, I would say. So in a very specific deck, again, I think this card could be very playable and very good. In Arena, I think it gets a little bit worse, actually, because you're unlikely to really fulfill the requirement. You just rather have the bigger stats than the card draw. But in a very specific token-oriented deck, I think this card could easily get up to like an 8 in power level. Could be wrong. Call of Valor. So on first glance, we've seen all the shouts so far. You can see them all in the different card reviews if you haven't seen them. But I think this one is probably the strongest. And we were all testing with some unoptimized decks on the preview event, the test server here. That said, it did do some pretty crazy things already. The first level of the shout already isn't terrible, and the second 2 are just kind of crazy. Like if you can get to like a word wall on the board, and then maybe take advantage of that with Soul Split on the word wall, then play this and get 2/3 Sovngarde heroes on turn 3 or something. And as soon as you get the other Call of Valor, it's going to fill an entire lane with 3/3s. Like that's just a ton of stat points. So I think we might see the return of aggressive token-based decks. Maybe in Mage, so you have the Soul Split for the word wall. Maybe in Spell Sword, like I was talking about. But yeah, I think Call of Valor is potentially the best shout in the set, at least since we haven't really gotten to play a whole lot with the cards yet. It's the shout I'm the most excited about. So yeah, I think this card is a solid 8 out of 10. And yeah, I like the card a lot. We'll see what kind of decks take advantage of it the most. Moving on to Cliffside Lookout. 3 cost 2/4. When you summon a dragon, it gains +1/+1. So potentially a snowball card. Anything that says when X happens, this gains attack and health could potentially be good. I haven't experimented too much with willpower dragon decks yet. I have to imagine that if you're going to be playing that many dragons, this card is good. But I feel like a willpower dragon deck will be pushed a little bit more towards control, which means the 3-drop slot is going to be used on something a little bit better as far as card quality, if you're not really going to use it to push damage. maybe like a mid-range monk dragon deck or something like that. On the surface, I'm just not really seeing a place for this card. It's reasonable enough. 3 cost 2/4. Well, 3 cost 2/4 is pretty bad, but 3 cost 3/5 is pretty good. So if you can play this card and immediately buff it the next turn, but that's a whole turn it's sitting there and it's susceptible to removal. So I really don't think this card is too great. In Arena, if you have enough dragons, I mean, you'll play a 3 cost 2/4 vanilla if you have to. But in Constructed, will it be used in Willpower dragon decks? I guess that depends on whether they take a more aggressive approach or a more defensive approach. Everyone's favorite card, Grizzly Gourmet, the thing that gives you the sweet roll title, the pastry chef. 3 cost 2/1, transform an enemy creature with 2 power or less into a sweet roll. Gotta be honest, not a huge fan. Wasn't a huge fan in my first impressions videos, and not a huge fan now. I just think whatever this card does, Execute and Penny Dasaki, Lotus Agent even, and Silence cards just do it better. In Arena can be decent enough removal. In Constructed, I just think there's already things that accomplish what this card wants to accomplish. You are summoning a sweet roll though, so if you also need to not only get rid of something with 2 or less power, but get rid of the effect, maybe get rid of a last gasp, it could be good, but I'm not seeing too many good targets currently for that, and then heal one of your guys using the sweet roll. That could be pretty solid. But yeah, I'm not super sold on this card. I think it's more of a meme card. But it's a cute meme card, right? It's a meme card that gives us sweet rolls, and can't say no to a sweet roll. 3 cost, 1/3, after you play an action, summon a 1/1 Thalmor Soldier. I like the Just Azir. I think, again, for like a token-based maze strategy, I saw this in combination with the Call of Valor, in combination with Soul Split and other actions. This could be potentially very powerful. The stats are horrendous, so in order to really get value out of this card, it's going to need to stick long enough for you to play 2 actions. Maybe not the hardest thing to do in a very specific type of deck. In the average deck, yeah, this card is pretty bad. In the average Arena deck, it's probably even worse. But in the exact right deck, I could see getting a lot of value off this card to be pretty easy. I'm going to give this card a solid 6 out of 10 with potential to be higher in the exact right deck. Thieves Guild Shadowfoot steals the top card of your opponent's deck and replaces it with a counterfeit trinket, which then allows your opponent to draw a card and take 1 damage. And so it's a 0 cost action for them. So they're going to be able to get their draw step. It's just not going to be the card they expected. You are literally stealing that top card of their deck, which can be pretty feel bad if you get a unique legendary. This card I don't think is a great example of like healthy variance because, you know, if you're a new player and you have that 1 of unique legendary, your opponent steals it, that feels pretty bad to lose to your own card that you were happy you had. Fortunately, I don't think this card is going to be great in competitive play. I think there are just too many good 3-drops with stats, and Eastmarch Crusader for more consistent card draw, because you could just steal something you can't use from your opponent. So yeah, I don't think it's too good and constructed. I just think for any deck that I can think of, I did test this a bit by the way already, but for any deck I can think of, there's a more appropriate 3-drop or many more appropriate 3-drops. In Arena, it's reasonable enough to see play. Usually aren't too many polarizing dead cards in Arena. Things are just like decent in everything. So, you know, you steal something with relatively okay stats, they take 1 damage on their draw step. Not the worst 3-drop ever, but in Constructed I think it may be close. So Devour, an action with destroy a creature with 4 power or less and give its keywords to a random dragon in your hand. You could get some serious value out of this card in a dragon deck using Willpower, which, as I said, I haven't really tested yet, but you could get Guard if you kill a Hive Defender, you could get Ward if you kill a Daggerfall Major, Windkeep Spellsword. This could be pretty sick, and getting those types of keywords on your dragons could be even sicker, especially if you get to kill something with Charge, because then one of your giant dragons is going to just charge right in there. Imagine if you have this and the 6 cost 5/5 Drain Willpower dragon we'll be talking about. You just somehow get a charge creature to die, and all of a sudden you kill a Cliff Racer with this, and then all of a sudden your guy has charge, and that's gonna just get your opponent. They couldn't play around it really. Could be pretty nuts. I feel like this card will pretty much be an instant inclusion in any real dragon-centric Willpower deck. Maybe one of the reasons to try that out in the first place, because this card has some serious power behind it. Imperial Camp. Didn't want to not show the premium there. Support ongoing. Summon, put a 1/2 Septum Guardsman, which costs 0, with Guard into your hand, and friendly guards have +1/+0. So you're basically getting a 2/2 on the board immediately, if you so choose to play the Septum Guardsman. And it's an ongoing support, so all of your guards have +1 attack. I think this requires the most specific deck of any card we've talked about so far. You really have to be focusing on guards for this to get value, and it's a 4-cost support, so I'm not overjoyed about it. I mean, if you can stack these with like Divine Fervors and stuff, you can get pretty serious Septum Guardsmans going on. We'll have to take a look again at some of the more guard support cards. I think they're trying to push for like a Spell Sword guard deck, and we already have Watch Commander from the core set, so that makes a good bit of sense. This works well with like Oldgate Warden and Portcullis and stuff. We'll have to see. That does seem very optimistic to me as a strategy in general. I could be surprised again, but we'll check out the other cards and see if this card makes any sense whatsoever. On paper, this card is pretty bad. It's just a little inconsistent and a little slow. But Septum Guardsman, I mean, hey, if that card can see play, I'm all on board. Legate Reek, or Rike. I really don't know how to pronounce this card. No one corrected me when I asked chat, so that's where we are. 4 cost 3/4. When you summon an Imperial, summon a 1/1 Imperial Grunt in the other lane. So we've seen a good amount of Imperials already, and of course the Grunts themselves are Imperials. Not too unsurprisingly, compared to another card we've seen so far, if this sticks and gets 1 token of value, it's already basically worth it, I would say. That would make it a 4 cost 4/5 in total stats, which is pretty much on curve with what you'd expect. 4 cost 3/4 right off the bat isn't amazing, but I think this card, again, in the right kind of token deck, could generate a good amount of value, at least enough to force your opponent to kill it right off the bat, which isn't always a thing they can do. And it feels pretty bad to use your silence target on this, because you kind of just hope they don't have Imperials to take advantage of it, but in the right deck, your deck is full of them. And I would like to say that I'm really happy they're focusing on the token generation strategy of Willpower. We haven't really seen too much token spell sort of token crusader in the meta recently. We've seen a lot of cards even so far that can really push that back into the spotlight, as opposed to just using it as a supportive control-oriented attribute. Next, we have a dragon. The first one. Do we have dragon next? We do have a dragon next. Revered Guardian. 4 cost 4/4 with guard. Very, very simple. Similar to the Intelligence Dragon, except that one has Prophecy instead of Guard. Not in love with the stats on this card for a Guard. I think I would rather play Hive Defender in any non-dragon deck, but for a dragon deck, I just love any decently statted 4-cost dragon. You'd probably play it as a 4/4 vanilla for 4 in a dragon deck. Guard is just, fits with the Willpower theme of being defensive. So that's one reason I think it might push a Willpower dragon deck to being more defensive. But yeah, I think for a dragon deck using Willpower, it's pretty clearly a staple. I think for a non-dragon deck using Willpower, unlike the Mystic Dragon and Intelligence, I don't think this card will see too much play outside of a dedicated dragon deck. Could be wrong. As with all cards, I could be wrong. But I think this is a really solid support card for a dragon deck, like a solid 7.5 out of 10. You just play it in a Willpower dragon deck. It's not fantastic by itself, but it enables you to make some pretty fantastic plays with your support cards too. Cauldron Keeper, 5-drop 3/5 guard, gives your activated supports an extra use, and you may activate your supports an extra time each turn. It's a 5 cost, it's not too resilient, it's unlikely it lives for multiple turns, but this could be pretty crazy with some supports that we've seen so far. We have Wabajak, for example, that has activation. Let's see what other supports there are. In this set we have College of Winterhold, which we talked about in the Intelligence review. Volendrung, kind of reasonable to get 2 charges out of that if you happen to be playing a deck like that. Dark Rift, you don't want to be using that on because you actually want your Storm Atronach. The Elixirs are all not great. Heroic Rebirth, I don't know if you're playing a Heroic Rebirth deck, it could be reasonable. Like I mentioned, Wabajak, Orb of Vermina. So there are some targets for this card. I just don't think that you're going to be playing enough of them Goldbrand. But again, those cards are not great by themselves on average, so I don't think you'll be playing enough of them to really get value out of the card. Not a huge fan of it. 5-drop, 3/5, nothing to write home about. So I don't expect this card, wherever it is, to see a whole lot of play. It's a cute card design. It's an Imperial again. I just don't love the card from a standpoint of something that's very consistent and constructed, so I don't expect to see a whole lot of play. Despite being cool card design, maybe we try some support decks, but I don't expect them to be too consistent still. Next is Karthspire's Scorge. 5 cost 4/4, giving all enemy creatures in this lane -1/-0. Not the most powerful dragon in the expansion. It did get me once in the preview event where I put 2 Fighters Guild recruits in a lane going into their turn 5 and I forgot this card existed. Besides that blowout, which was just due to my own incompetence and not knowing the cards yet, I don't think this card is super powerful. Way worse than Cloudrest Illusionist for a lot of reasons, despite the only pro to this card itself being a dragon. I'm just not excited about a 5 cost 4/4, and I don't think the effect is going to be that impactful. I guess if you really need to pack your deck with as many dragons as possible, you could include this card, but I'm not excited to include it, so I'm going to say it's 4 or 5 in Constructed, and probably like a 5 or 6 in Arena. You can get a bit more value out of it, but it's still not where your 5-drops really want to be. Lydia may be where your 5-drops want to be. Guarding both lanes is pretty serious. We've seen a lot of discussion about this card already. People said it's broken, people said it's bad. I think it's pretty good in a specific type of defensive deck. Control Mage, Control Spell Sword. I think it does kind of fit perfectly. Potentially, if lethal decks or decks with a ton of lethal creatures get too good, Lydia might get a bit worse because you can't protect it from lethal at all. If there's a lethal creature in either of your opponent's lanes, putting Lydia anywhere means it's just going to be killed, basically. It's going to be used as a removal action on that lethal creature. Hopefully you're okay with that trade, because that's what's going to happen. That said, for an aggressive deck, this card is a serious nightmare, especially if it follows a Hive Defender, especially if it follows a wrung-out Hive Defender into Lydia on the following turn. That's a lot of health to work through with your aggressive pushes. While Lydia doesn't have the most attack value, it's not going to be trading with anything Hive Defender wouldn't be trading, and I mean killing those kinds of things, not dealing a lot of damage to your opponent's stuff. If you're up against an aggro deck, it's not a whole lot that they run with more than 3 health anyway, so I think this card is good in a defensive deck as a strict aggro counter. Not very powerful in many other situations, but probably worth it just on that alone in certain control decks. Snowhawk Detachment gains +1/+1 if you have another creature with guard. So again, they're really trying to push this sort of guard deck, I think. So when it gets its effect, it's a 5-cost 4/6 with guard. Not amazing, right? Like, it's trying to push some guard synergy, but is that even really good? It comes out on turn 5. It's pretty big for turn 5. Preserve of the Roots of 4 cost 6/6 with guard, but not until you have 7 magicka. So in a very specific sequence of events, Snowhawk Detachment could be what you want to do during a turn. I just seriously doubt it. We've seen better 5-drops already. I think I would... This is why I don't really think the guard kind of deck is probably going to be too good, is because you're playing cards like this to get max value, and it's just not a solid card by itself, really. Obviously, it's good against aggressive decks, very straightforward aggressive decks. If your deck's full of guards, you probably shouldn't lose to decks like that. So maybe we can... I'll definitely experiment with this kind of deck, with like a guard deck. I don't think it's going to make a huge impact. I just don't think the payoff of this card is too high. In Arena, it's totally fine. If you can get a 5-cost 4/6 with guard, it might just win you a game that's pretty serious. And a 5-cost 3/5 with guard isn't the worst in Arena anyway. I'm just worried about its constructed viability, basically. Look at that premium art. Wow. Winterhold, Illusionist. Summon another creature, disappears, then returns at the end of the turn. Very interesting. This card has offensive capabilities, defensive capabilities. Does it do it better than like a close call or a piercing javelin? Because you can use it to remove your opponent's guard and attack through it and then kill them, and then who cares if it comes back, they're dead. Or you can use it to remove one of your own guys. I just actually don't really know what the implications of this are too much. You can remove things with effects that are taking over the board, remove like a Militant Chieftain, reduce the orc's power level or something like that. I just don't know. It's a really cute card. I think this is one that's actually hard to rate on first glance. I'm gonna refrain from talking about it too much because there's probably some serious interaction I'm missing here. It's just a rather expensive use of this effect. It's still probably not as good as something like Close Call or just something that duplicates the summon effect. But it does have good offensive capabilities too. You can just remove that guard, get in there, but that's probably just worse than Piercing Javelin or a Silence in the first place, I would assume. So not amazing on first glance. The amazing thing about this card is the premium art, but there's probably some serious interaction that I'm missing. But I don't think the card is going to be too impactful either way. This card could be really good. Bandit, Ringleader, summon other friendly creatures in this lane, have Pilfer, draw a card this turn. Now this gives Willpower some serious draw power. You don't even need to play a Pilfered deck, really. Obviously, if you are playing a Pilfered deck and you have Master of Thieves on the board already, then everything gets to attack twice, and you're drawing a ton of cards. But even in like a token deck like we were talking about, or any aggressive deck using Willpower, yeah, the stats on this card aren't too aggressive. But if you can get 2 draws off it already, you're playing a 6-cost Triumphant Jarl with 3/5 instead of 4/4. You're just drawing 2 cards. And that's really, really good, and it's not determinant upon you being higher in life than your opponent like Jarl is. I think this card's going to see a bunch of play. I think it's pretty easy to overlook it at first glance as just another Pilfer card, but you really don't need to be playing that deck for it to be good. And it does make that deck substantially better because Master of Thieves does get better. You're giving things without Pilfer effects, and they're then attacking twice if they're just a normal creature on the board. And the stats on this, while not amazing, are not horrible. They're about on par with what you'd expect from a yellow Triumphant Jarl. And yeah, I like this card quite a bit. I think in Arena also it's insane, the card advantage. You're going to be aggressive naturally. It's not too expensive. It's not too understated. The card advantage matters. Draws at a premium. I like this card a good bit, actually. Expected to see a fine amount of play. Praetorian Commander. Summon, give creatures in your deck +2/+2. This is interesting. It just gives all creatures in your deck +2/+2. I'm gonna probably just admit that I'm underrating this card immediately. Like, the stats aren't good for a 6-drop. If you're caring about the power of your creatures, you're probably playing something a bit more aggressive, right? It's like, that's something I could probably miss reading about the card. You could play it in something more defensive too, like a Prophecy Control Mage, and just say, well, all my prophecies are going to be huge, all my creatures are going to be huge. My initial reaction is that if you're playing it in a more aggressive deck, you probably don't need this effect because the game is going to end very quickly after you play this card, or you hope, or, worst case scenario, the fact that you played a 6-drop 3/3 allows your opponent to stabilize. And again, you're only going to be drawing like one card per turn usually, unless you have something like the ringleader following it up. The effect is definitely powerful in the long game, so maybe you do play it in something more defensive. Is it better than Divine Fervor? I'm honestly not sure. I think this effect just works the way I think it does, which is you play it, all your creatures get +2/+2, and that's the end of the story. If that's how it is, it's pretty damn powerful. In a token-generating deck, it might be less powerful because the deck is faster, and a lot of your creatures come from action, so they wouldn't be buffed. This card seems like a sleeper card. I'm going to say it's like not fantastic in a lot of things that currently exist, but I could just be completely wrong because +2/+2 to everything is kind of insane. I'll probably test this in a Prophecy Control Mage. I expect that to make an impact somewhere. In Arena, yeah, this effect is just absurdly powerful. You better hope, if you're the opponent, that you can punish them for playing a 6-cost 3/3, because if the game goes longer, everything's going to be way too big to deal with, and it's going to be a serious problem. Undying Dragon, 6-cost 5/5 with Drain, and it's a 10/10 when you have 30 or more health. This card is pretty damn good as a dragon goes, so if you're playing a Willpower dragon deck, expect to be picking up Undying Dragon. I would assume it's just a staple in that kind of deck. It's not too expensive. It's basically on par with Night Shadow, which doesn't see a ton of play. So yeah, this card is still answerable, but it's still a good tool against very aggressive decks. And if you can get benefits from playing a bunch of dragons, this card is totally reasonable as well. It drains for a good bit, and then it drains you closer back to your 30 health, so if you can drain back to 30 health against an aggressive deck, it'll be a 10/10, but they've probably already lost by that point anyway. But it has potential to just get completely out of hand. You can't just leave this card alone and, hope it doesn't do too much. It will be very, very annoying if you're any sort of an aggressive deck, which means you have to have an answer for it like Night Shadow immediately, with the benefit of it being a dragon. So good card, and in Arena, it's totally sick as well. Wolf Cage, this is a support with uses again, 6 cost, and the uses are summon a 2/2 wolf, which has +1/+1 for each other friendly wolf. It's a 3-cost creature. Not thinking this card is too good. I like that they're trying to force some wolf synergy. I just don't think this is really the card that does it. Maybe in the future this card gets better with more wolf support, like, more cards like Alpha Wolf that are better statted. But at the end of the day, you're only going to get 6/6 of value from this card over 3 turns. They're going to buff each other up if the wolves get to stick, but we're already talking about like turn 8 here by the time you get all 3 uses. I don't think a wolf deck wants to be that slow. So yeah, not digging this card. I think it just costs too much. Moving on to Arrest. And this one's tricky because it's kind of hard to think about cards you'd rather steal for their effect and not their attack value. So yeah, it loses guard if it has a guard, so you can't just steal a wall, and it's permanently shackled, so you can't just steal a beat stick. Yeah, this one's tough. I just don't think this card does anything that you don't already have Piercing Javelin to do besides get rid of their last gasp effects. Anything else, you just rather use Piercing Javelin, Edict of Azura, Belligerent Giant, and if you're playing Control deck, you already have Marok, so this effect seems somewhat unnecessary. Could it function as relatively okay removal in Arena? Probably, but again, you're not going to be able to really use the card for anything, so I'm not a huge fan. Moving on to the legendary Jarl Balgruuf, who I'm pronouncing wrong, I'm sure. It summons a bunch of things, it doesn't have great stats, but at the start of your turn, if your lanes are full, you win the game, so the first, real alternate win condition card. We have cards that deal a lot of damage, but nothing really just said you win the game. Until this card. Alright, so people might have been saying it's a little bit busted. That said, how many games do you actually remember starting your turn at any point with both of your lanes are full? At the start of your turn. You don't just fill your lanes and pass to your opponent. It's at the start of your turn. You have full lanes, or you have 7 cards and your opponent gives you a prophecy creature for some reason with this card on the board. But if this card is on the board, they're going to be killing it, right? It's a 7-cost 3/3. If they don't have an answer for a 7-cost 3/3 or any of your other 7 guys on the board, yeah, then you win the game. But if you don't, here's what it does. It puts a 2/2 on the board and a 3/1 on the board. And that's okay stat-wise. Maybe you might play this card just for the token generation, but if General Tullius doesn't see much play, I don't imagine this card's going to see much more play. It looks a lot better than it is because it does have the text, you win the game, and that's pretty appealing. You'd like to win the game. I just don't think you're ever going to be able to do this off this card's effect unless you just had turns and turns and turns of free time from your opponent, at which point an Enraged Mudcrab would have probably won the game too. But yeah, this card's alternate win condition, Probably not going to go off any reasonable amount of the time. Potentially okay for the token synergy, but I really don't think it's going to be that good. Did I show the premium one? I did show the premium one, right? Okay, good. A Land Divided. Now this is the last card in Willpower. Just making sure there. 8 cost action, fill the left lane with Stormcloak Skirmishers or the right lane with Colovian Troopers. So either a bunch of 2/2s with Guard or a bunch of 3/1s with Breakthrough. I like this card in a very specific style of deck. I like it in like a very slow control spellsword deck with Necromancer's Amulet. We've seen that before. Just focuses on a bunch of stall, filling the lanes, getting a bunch of life gain, and literally being the slowest deck out there to punish those other control decks without answers to Necromancer's Amulet. In a more proactive deck, I don't think it does enough for an 8 cost. I think there are just better aggressive options and better token generating options. You're getting 8/8 of stats, but that 8/8 of stats is completely susceptible to any sweeper in the game. Dawn's Wrath, Firestorm, Ice Storm, double Skaven Pyromancer, and if you play the 3/1 Breakthrough guys, 1 Skaven Pyromancer. So very fragile stuff. If you're playing this card, it's already going to be at least like turn 8, and you expect your stuff to die, so probably in the Necromancer's Amulet deck. And in a more proactive / good consistent deck, I don't expect this card to see much play. In Arena, the stats are pretty reasonable, so I'd probably pick this card over a lot of different legendaries. I wouldn't be too excited about it, but I don't think it's the worst card at all in Arena. So that's my thoughts on the Willpower cards in Heroes of Skyrim. As always, if you've enjoyed, feel free to leave a like. Consider subscribing to my channel for daily Legends videos. Check out the other parts of the set review, as well as follow my stream in the description down below, and I'll see you guys next time.